Once, it was a promise, a job, a home, a future. Today, it's a $400,000 mortgage, $100,000 in student debt, and 3 jobs just to survive. So what happened to the American dream? And was it ever real to begin with? In the mid-20th century, America didn't just build highways and suburbs, it built something far more powerful, a global fantasy. The idea was simple, elegant, intoxicating. Work hard, follow the rules, and you'll earn a piece of the good life. A steady job, a house with a yard, a family. Security, not just for you, but for your children and their children. Hollywood exported it, politicians preached it, immigrants believed in it. It became a cultural currency, more valuable than the dollar. The American dream wasn't just a national slogan. It was the closest thing the modern world had to a shared moral promise, that progress would be rewarded, that fairness was built into the system. But somewhere along the way, the blueprint began to fracture. Wages stagnated, healthcare costs exploded, university degrees became price tags with no guarantee. Housing turned from shelter into speculation. And for millions of Americans, especially young people, people of color, and working-class families, that promise began to feel like a rigged game. This isn't just a tale of decline. It's a story of systemic reprogramming, where dreams were commercialized, opportunity was financialized, and mobility became a privilege, not a right. And the consequences extend far beyond America's borders, because when the nation that once promised prosperity to the world begins to struggle under the weight of its own design, what happens to the rest of the world still chasing its myth? This is not a eulogy for a dream. It's an examination of who it worked for, who it failed, and what it means for the future of belief in economic justice itself. Welcome to Empire Secrets. The American dream was never just a reality. It was a campaign, a masterclass in economic branding. And it began not in the factories or the farmlands, but in the boardrooms and speechwriters' rooms of post-war America. In the 1950s, the United States emerged from World War II not only as a military superpower, but as the world's most influential storyteller. With Europe in ruins and the Soviet Union locked behind an ideological iron curtain, America seized the moment. It began broadcasting a message: we are the land of opportunity. Suburban life became the crown jewel of this promise. Developers like William Levitt built entire neighborhoods overnight, rows of identical homes with white picket fences sold to returning veterans through low-interest government-backed loans. The GI Bill became the on-ramp to middle-class life, offering college tuition and mortgages to millions, but not to everyone. Black Americans, despite fighting the same war, were routinely denied loans, excluded from suburbs, and redlined out of wealth. By 1960, nearly 98% of homes financed through the GI Bill had gone to white families. The dream was never universal. It was curated, targeted, and commercialized from the very beginning. Then came the next evolution: television. In living rooms across the country, brands didn't just sell soap and cereal, they sold lifestyles. Owning a home wasn't just smart, it was patriotic. Driving a car, grilling in the backyard, sending your kids to college. These became benchmarks of success, reinforced by every ad, sitcom, and presidential address. And just beneath the surface of this feel-good prosperity was a quiet financial revolution. In the 1980s, Reaganomics ushered in a new era of deregulation, tax cuts for the wealthy, and the rise of trickle-down theory. The government wasn't the answer, they said, it was the problem. So the burden of the dream shifted from the state to the individual. Public investment gave way to private credit. Social safety nets were trimmed down while consumer spending was pumped up, and corporations learned how to wrap every product, policy, and paycheck inside the language of personal responsibility. Suddenly, if you couldn't afford a home, it wasn't a systemic issue, it was a personal failure. If your job didn't pay enough, you just needed to work harder. If you were drowning in debt, it was your fault for not managing it better. What had once been a national ambition became a personal pressure. The dream was no longer a promise. It became a performance, an endless race with no finish line. But behind the curtain, something else was happening. The real wages of American workers had stopped growing. In 1978, the average CEO made roughly 30 times more than their workers. By 2022, it was over 400 times. The gap wasn't accidental. It was policy. It was profit. The dream hadn't failed because people stopped believing in it. It failed because it was too effective at selling a future that no longer existed. And the result? A generation told that they could have it all if they just worked hard enough, while the ladder beneath them was quietly being dismantled. In the early 20th century, debt was a last resort. By the 21st, it became the business model. America didn't just drift into a debt culture, it was architected. From the 1980s onwards, as wages stagnated and the cost of living soared, financial institutions discovered a more profitable solution than raising incomes: lending money. But this wasn't just about convenience, it was about control. Credit became the new currency of the middle class. In 1980, American household debt was under $2 trillion. By 2024, it had passed $17 trillion. That's more than the GDP of China. And it's not an accident, it's a feature of the system. First came credit cards, marketed in the 1980s as tools of freedom. But behind every swipe was an interest rate that quietly siphoned wealth upward. Today, the average credit card APR in the US exceeds 20%, and the average household carries over $6,000 in unpaid balances. Then came student loans. Sold as good debt, they were marketed as the ticket to upward mobility. But as universities raised tuition, often far beyond inflation, the loans kept flowing. In 2000, total student debt in America was $200 billion. By 2023, it was $1.7 trillion. For many, the promise of education became a financial trap, where a diploma came with 2 decades of payments and no guarantee of economic security. And while young Americans sacrificed years to repay their loans, universities expanded like corporations, building stadiums, luxury dorms, and executive offices. The system was working for everyone except the students. But the debt machine doesn't stop at education. Auto loans, once rare, are now standard. Medical debt is the leading cause of bankruptcy in America, and buy now, pay later apps are teaching teenagers how to borrow before they even understand what credit is. Every moment of aspiration, buying a home, getting an education, starting a business, is now linked to borrowing, and every loan reinforces a hidden dynamic. Wealthy institutions extract, the average citizen repays with interest. The myth says debt is a stepping stone, but for millions, it's a treadmill, keeping them running just fast enough to avoid collapse, but never fast enough to build real wealth. And the psychological impact is just as corrosive. Debt becomes shame, shame becomes silence, and silence becomes compliance. People don't riot when they're in debt. They work longer hours, they accept lower wages, they stay quiet hoping that someday the numbers will go down. But here's the truth: debt isn't just a financial tool, it's a political one. It ensures that millions of Americans remain obedient, overworked, and too afraid to question the system, because their future has already been sold to the bank. This is not the freedom the dream once promised. This is a cycle where dreams are bought on credit and paid for with decades of your life. Few things symbolized the American dream more than owning a home, a place that was yours, a place to build a life, and more importantly, to build wealth. For years, that illusion held strong. From 1945 to the early 2000s, buying a house wasn't just a milestone, it was the defining marker of adulthood, stability, and success. And for many white middle-class families, it worked. Homes appreciated, generational wealth grew, property meant power. But quietly, in the background, the rules were changing. In the 2000s, while wages failed to keep up with inflation, Americans were told to keep spending anyway. How? By using their homes as collateral. Banks aggressively pushed subprime mortgages, often to people who couldn't afford them because the profits were in the packaging. Those mortgages were bundled, sold, resold, and bet on by Wall Street as if they were chips in a casino. By 2008, the system collapsed. Over 10 million Americans lost their homes, and in the ashes of the foreclosure crisis, a new empire emerged: institutional landlords. Private equity firms like Blackstone moved in and started buying entire neighborhoods, not one home at a time, but by the block. What used to be a path to ownership had now become a permanent rent economy. By 2022, investors were buying 1 in every 7 homes in major US cities. In some areas like Atlanta, that number rose to 1 in 4. Not to live in, not to raise families in, but to lease out for profit. The result? A new form of locked-in dependency. Median home prices in America have more than doubled since 2012, while real wages have barely moved. Today, the average American needs over 13 years of savings just for a down payment, if they can avoid medical bills, student loans, or inflation in the meantime. And for renters, the picture is even worse. In cities like Los Angeles, New York, and Miami, more than half of all renters spend over 30% of their income on housing. Some spend more than 50%. That's not cost-burdened, that's economic suffocation. Meanwhile, the very firms pricing people out are making billions. In 2023, the 5 largest rental corporations in the US reported record profits, even while evictions surged and homelessness rose in nearly every major metro. But the most insidious part of this system isn't the pricing, it's the narrative. We're still told that home ownership is the goal, that if you just save harder, hustle longer, cut back on your coffee, you too can someday own a home, even as the system itself shifts further and further out of reach. In reality, the American housing market is no longer about families, it's about portfolios. And the dream? It's been converted into a financial product, sold to you with glossy ads and smiling couples on billboards, while the real owners quietly collect rent from the shadows. The home that was supposed to be your foundation has become someone else's business model. And the longer this continues, the more the very idea of ownership becomes a privilege for the few, not a right for the many. For generations, the path was clear. Get an education and the world opened up. College wasn't just about knowledge, it was the gateway to the dream. Better jobs, better income, a better life. That idea became so powerful, so deeply embedded, that by the early 2000s, not going to college was seen as a risk. But the real risk, it turned out, was taking the deal. Between 1980 and 2020, the average cost of attending a 4-year public college in the US increased by nearly 170%, even after adjusting for inflation. At the same time, state funding per student dropped by over 30%. Colleges became more expensive, but not because they offered more value. They simply shifted the burden from governments to students. To make up the difference, a solution was offered: student loans. But what began as a tool became a trap. Today, 43 million Americans hold student debt. The total, over $1.7 trillion, more than all credit card and auto loan debt combined. The average borrower owes around $37,000, and for many, repayment doesn't just last years, it defines entire decades of their lives. But where did all that money go? Colleges expanded, not in classrooms but in branding. Luxury dorms, gleaming student centers, million-dollar football programs. University presidents now earn CEO-level salaries, and institutions compete less on academic quality than on prestige marketing. In the process, education became a business, a diploma became a product, and students became consumers of hope. sold the idea that this one piece of paper could solve all their problems. But the job market didn't hold up its end of the bargain. Today, 53% of recent college grads are underemployed, working in jobs that don't require a degree. And even those with relevant jobs often start with wages that can't keep pace with their loan repayments, rent, or healthcare. It's not that education has no value, but its price has outpaced its payoff, and the risk has shifted entirely onto the individual, while the institutions remain protected and profitable. Even worse, the debt crisis is not evenly distributed. Black borrowers on average owe more and repay more slowly, thanks to wage disparities and fewer generational assets. First-generation college students often face the heaviest burdens with the least support, and yet the system keeps repeating itself because the dream still holds emotional power. Parents still tell their kids it's the only way. Politicians still frame it as the great equalizer. And banks, they keep lending because the loans are nearly impossible to discharge, even in bankruptcy. This is no longer education as empowerment, it's education as extraction. An entire generation was told that college was the key, but the door it opened led many not to opportunity, but a lifetime of repayments, stress, and broken promises. The American dream once said that learning would lift you, but now it's leveraged you, turning knowledge into a commodity and ambition into interest payments. In most wealthy nations, healthcare is a right. In America, it's a revenue stream. Here, a broken leg can cost $10,000, an ambulance ride $2,500, an insulin pen that costs $6 to manufacture sold for over $300 in US pharmacies. This isn't just market inefficiency, it's deliberate design. The American healthcare system is the most expensive in the world. In 2023, total health spending reached $4.7 trillion, or nearly 18% of the entire US economy. Yet despite that staggering cost, America ranks 37th in the world for health outcomes, according to the World Health Organization. Life expectancy is declining, maternal mortality is rising, and over 100 million Americans carry medical debt. So, how did we get here? After World War II, most Americans received healthcare through their employers, a model unique among developed countries. But as costs grew and wages stagnated, corporations quietly shifted more of the burden onto workers. Higher deductibles, co-pays, premiums. Insurance companies, meanwhile, built billion-dollar empires by doing one thing well: saying no, denying claims, limiting coverage, stalling reimbursements. Not as accidents, but as strategies. In 2022, United Health Group, America's largest health insurer, posted profits of $20.6 billion. That same year, over 60% of bankruptcies in the US were linked to medical debt. But the system doesn't end with insurance. Hospitals operate like corporations, charging wildly different prices for the same procedures, depending on your coverage. A simple MRI can cost $400 in Japan. In America, up to $3,500. Pharmaceutical companies, shielded by patent protections and lobbying power, price life-saving drugs far above global norms. In 2023, Pfizer spent more on marketing than research, not to innovate, but to influence. And politicians? Campaign donations from the healthcare industry have reached over $600 million per election cycle, effectively buying silence in the face of national outrage. The result is a system where profit is not tied to health, but to volume, billing codes, and denial rates. Americans aren't just patients, they're customers, commodities, and collateral. Every diagnosis becomes a business opportunity, every emergency an invoice. Even dying comes with a bill. But the most damaging effect isn't just financial, it's psychological. The fear of going to the doctor, the delay of treatment, the quiet calculation. Can I afford to stay alive? This is not how a dream functions. This is how an economy devours its own people. In the American dream, success meant freedom, but in the healthcare economy, even survival is gated by profit margins, because here being healthy isn't a birthright, it's a business transaction, and millions are paying with more than just money. For everyone, the message was clear: work hard and you'll make it. That was the heart of the American dream. But today, millions of Americans are discovering a darker truth. You can work full-time, sometimes multiple jobs, and still not afford rent, healthcare, or food. Not because they failed, but because the math no longer works. The federal minimum wage in the United States has been stuck at $7.25 an hour since 2009. That's over 15 years without an increase, while housing, groceries, fuel, and medical bills have all climbed dramatically. Adjusted for inflation, the current minimum wage is worth less than what it was in the 1960s. In fact, if it had kept pace with productivity, today's minimum wage would be over $22 an hour. But it's not just about the floor. Even middle-income jobs have flatlined. Between 1979 and 2023, US productivity grew by over 60%, but wages only rose by 17% in the same period. The difference? It didn't disappear, it was absorbed into profits, stock buybacks, and CEO compensation. In 1978, the average CEO made 30 times more than the typical worker. Today, it's over 400 times. And many of those workers, especially in retail, food service, and logistics, are on government assistance despite working 40+ hours a week. This isn't a glitch in capitalism, it's the new operating system. Corporations have optimized for one thing: labor efficiency. That means fewer benefits, less security, and total flexibility for the employer. The rise of the gig economy was sold as freedom. Drive when you want, work on your terms. But for millions of Uber drivers, DoorDash couriers, and Amazon Flex workers, that freedom comes with no healthcare, no sick days, no pensions, just algorithmic schedules and fluctuating pay, often below minimum wage once expenses are counted. And yet culturally, the pressure to keep hustling only grows stronger. Social media glorifies the grind. Motivational speakers preach self-blame. If you're broke, it's because you didn't hustle hard enough. Meanwhile, the system demands more output for less reward. The emotional toll is staggering. Burnout is rising. Mental health is deteriorating. And job security has become a relic of the past. Even those who make it often find themselves trapped. Because with no universal healthcare, no affordable housing, no debt relief, and no pension guarantees, every paycheck becomes a lifeline, not a ladder. And for immigrant workers and communities of color, the gap is even more severe, where opportunities are scarce, protections are weaker, and wages are often lower despite longer hours and essential labor. So, where does this leave us? In a nation where working poverty is now normalized, where the dream demands more but delivers less, where labor is no longer rewarded with dignity but with disposability, this isn't just an economic erosion, it's moral failure. Because when the people who hold up a nation can't afford to stand tall, the dream they were promised begins to collapse under its own weight. The American dream is never just an internal idea. It became a global blueprint. From the Cold War onward, the dream was marketed not just as a personal aspiration, but as a civilizational model, the standard against which progress was measured around the world. America's consumer culture, home ownership obsession, car-centric lifestyle, and college for success formula were adopted, admired, and replicated far beyond its borders. And at first it seemed like a promise worth chasing. In the Philippines, India, Kenya, and Brazil, entire generations grew up watching US films and TV shows depicting a version of life that seemed perfect. Clean suburbs, high school proms, upward mobility, and endless opportunity. Even leaders adopted the rhetoric. In post-Soviet Eastern Europe, in the Gulf states, in newly industrializing Asian economies, politicians invoked the dream, framing deregulation, privatization, and market liberalism as the roads to middle-class prosperity. But as these countries tried to import the model, they also imported its consequences. Cities expanded not around people, but around cars. Student debt models spread into emerging economies. Western fast food and private hospitals displaced traditional diets and public healthcare. Housing bubbles inflated in South Korea, Canada, Australia, and the UK, mirroring America's model of real estate as investment rather than shelter. And now, the cracks that once seemed isolated to the US are visible everywhere. In China, a housing crisis threatens the dreams of millions of youth raised to believe in the home ownership as the marker of adulthood. In Europe, young workers in gig jobs struggle to afford rents in cities their parents once thrived in. In Latin America, privatized education and healthcare mimics the American template, leaving millions behind. The American dream didn't just collapse inward, it radiated outward, repackaged by corporations and governments as progress, even when it led to inequality, burnout, and disillusionment. And still, the dream sells. Global marketing campaigns promise freedom through credit cards. Streaming platforms export stories of rags to riches that ignore the structural forces behind success. Elite universities welcome international students, charging six-figure tuitions for the illusion of status and mobility, while offering little economic return. But here's the deeper tragedy. As America begins to question the dream's legitimacy, much of the world is still chasing its ghost, investing in a system designed to prioritize profit over people, extraction over equity, and that illusion has geopolitical consequences. Economic models shaped by American corporate interests are now fueling instability, migration, and distrust across the global south. Foreign governments are pressured to emulate US-style capitalism, while the American people themselves grow more skeptical of whether the model ever worked at all. The dream didn't fail in silence, it failed with global implications, leaving behind not just broken promises, but entire generations who planned their lives around something that never truly existed. And yet, its narrative persists, because the dream isn't just American anymore, it's a commodity, packaged, sold, and exported, not as reality, but as aspiration, just far enough out of reach to keep everyone moving, consuming, borrowing, and believing. The American dream was never just a story. It was a contract, a quiet agreement between nation and citizen. Work hard, follow the rules, and you will rise. But over time, the terms changed. The wages stalled, the homes disappeared, the education cost tripled, and the burden shifted off the system and onto the individual. Today, Americans are told the dream is still alive, just harder to reach. That's not because people failed, it's because the system succeeded at something else, turning hope into a transaction, turning freedom into debt, turning ambition into labor for someone else. This isn't just about America, it's about every nation that modeled its future on this blueprint, every citizen who took the risk, every family who believed. And yet, amid the broken promises and mounting disillusionment, there's something powerful that remains. Awareness. More people are asking questions. More workers are walking away. More young people are challenging the rules they were told to follow. Because the real dream was never about owning a home or getting a degree. It was about building a life with dignity. That dream isn't dead. It's just been hijacked. And now the challenge isn't to chase the old version, but to build something better together. Not an illusion, but a future grounded in truth, fairness, and shared power. Because if the American dream failed, it failed not because people stopped believing, but because too many profited from keeping it just out of reach. This was Empire Secrets. If you liked the video, like and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching, guys. You're a legend. See you in the next one. Your desire, your empire.